Hello there. One of the things I've seen floating around the internet lately has been the question of whether or not the Haranir from Khazar are actually a missing link between Night Elves and Trolls. So today, I wanted to go over what we know so far, and talk about what is the most likely case as to who and what the Haranir are. The best place to start with that is to go as far back on the evolutionary train as we can, starting off with the first trolls on Azeroth. While we don't know exactly what year they came to be, we do know that at some point during the Black Empire, the first trolls would start to emerge and build up their own civilization. These trolls being the Zandalari trolls that we currently have within the game, with their main base of operations being around what would become modern Zul'Dazar, Kunlai Summit, and the Jade Forest, because at the time, all of Azeroth that we've been to, besides the Dragon Isles, existed as one main supercontinent, like our own planet's Pangaea, which they had named Kalimdor. Eventually, the Zandalari people would expand into other regions of Kalimdor. Mind you that just like Elves, the trolls are very susceptible to magical and environmental changes. Because of that, different groups of the Zandalari would start to evolve into sub-races of their species, based on where they had chosen to settle. Those in the icy regions of Northrend evolved into ice trolls, like the Drakari. Those who settled in the regions of what would become Tearsfall Glades and Silverpine Forests would become forest trolls, like the Reventusk or the Amani. Those who settled in the rainforest-like environments would change into jungle trolls, such as the Darkspear, Gurubashi, and Shadowspear tribes. One of the Zandalari, however, were particularly important for this conversation. That group would become the Dog Trolls. This group of trolls migrated to sources of great natural connection, like that of Mount Hyjal, and they took up residence within the caves and its roots. While other troll tribes warred with each other for resources and land, these trolls preferred peace and communing with nature, preferring to avoid contact with others if possible, often only coming out of their caves at night. We know that while they are not traditional druids, as that wouldn't happen for many years to come in the lore, these trolls did still practice druid-like spells and rituals. Thanks to a new quest chain and season of discovery of all things, it seems that a large number of these dog trolls actually worshipped the lower Agamagan. At least most trolls typically refer to their lower as the strongest that there ever was, or the wisest, or something similar, and so this Shadowtooth emissary, who is only one of like 2 dog trolls in all forms of World of Warcraft itself, mentioning that is a pretty good indicator. Agamagan was the boar god. Not only is he often depicted in art with quills, but he is also the progenitor god of the quill boar, which a lot of Loa spawned the animal folk within World of Warcraft, which is something that we can see in-game with races like the Sethrak from Sethralis in BFA. It is also hinted that Vulpera came about in a similar manner from a trickster fox Loa from the War of the Ancients. We also know that Worgen are literally a volatile form from connecting to another wild god in Loa, Guldrin. But the connection to Agamagan with these dog trolls could likely explain why the Haranir have quill options to them if they are indeed tied to the dog trolls. Now, over time, many of the dog trolls are said to have naturally migrated towards the center of Kalimdor through underground tunnels and labyrinth-like groves, encountering fairy dragons and dryads along their journey. Although it is heavily implied now with Dragonflight that some of these dog trolls also worshipped the wild god Kuwanzo, as when we meet Kuwanzo in the Emerald Dream, Q talks about being the Loa of Change, and that they adapted the title of Loa because the people who worshipped Q used that title. We know that Loa is the title only trolls would give to their wild gods in general, so Kuwanzo is worshipped by at least one troll tribe. But moving on, this lake that they were drawn to would turn out to actually be the Well of Eternity, a giant flowing lake of pure arcane magic comprised of the blood of the planet's world soul. Without getting into too many specifics or details in this video about the Well of Eternity, what's important to know here is that arcane magic, or order magic as it is sometimes referred to within the Warcraft universe, is effectively what you think of when you just think of magic in general. It's ethereal, prophetic, pure, and unlimited in its potential. Arcane magic is also one of the 6 main pillars of the universe within World of Warcraft, with life and nature being a separate pillar, but more on that later. This lake would allow them to learn and understand Titanic language, and learn words such as Kalimdor and Elune, the goddess of the moon, the latter of which they believed lived and slept within the Well of Eternity during the day. This magical lake would transform the Dark Trolls even further to become Night Elves, and creating the Elven language from part of the words that they had learned from the Well of Eternity itself. These Night Elves would adapt and change their society to mostly forgo nature in favor of arcane, building massive cities, and an empire that would eventually squash the Zandalari and a lot of the other troll tribes, which I know we mostly pictured Night Elves as this druidic superpower, so to speak, but druidic nature magic was actually pretty taboo in Night Elf society until the fall of Ashara and the Sundering. The closest we get in-game to seeing what Night Elven society was actually like is that of Suramar and the Nightborn, as their society never actually gave up their arcane ways, on top of the fact that Suramar was one of the only ancient Night Elven cities to stay preserved when the Sundering happened, thanks to its big magical bubble. Before we move on from the Night Elves, I do want to also really quickly mention the fact that Kiwanzo is an owl god, and almost all of the Night Elven and a lot of the Nightborn motifs, art, and architecture heavily features and pays homage to owls in some capacity, making it even more likely that Kiwanzo was worshipped by some of these Dark Trolls, and that they played a role in making the Elves. Now, let's get back to the Dark Trolls. Did they all migrate to the World of Eternity? Well, we actually know that they in fact didn't all migrate and eventually become Night Elves. During the period of time of the Third War, when Grommash Hellscream first arrived in Ashenvale, we know that he actually found a small settlement of Dark Trolls. Of course, he'd then unalive every single one of them and steal a magical artifact from them. Later on, as the war progressed, even more Dark Trolls would be unalived and caught in the crossfire when Tyrande and Malfurion were looking for the Druids of the Talon. Towards the war's end, we see what is likely the last group of living Dark Trolls, at least that we know of, the Shadowtooth clan. They are seen helping Night Elves, humans, and Orcs fight off Archimonde at the Battle for Mount Hyjal. Later on, during the events of World of Warcraft, we wouldn't see or hear anything really about the Dark Trolls at all until Cataclysm. Bran Bronzebeard mentions that it seems as if the Twilight's Hammer has killed off all of the remaining Dark Trolls, but he's not 100% sure, as he hadn't had a chance to delve deeper into their ancient cave networks, which led to a lot of community discussion every so often on if and when we might see more Dark Trolls later on. In Battle for Azeroth, we would get our next appearance from the mysterious Dark Trolls, this time in the form of Speaker Iknal. Iknal is a member of the Shadowtooth clan and confirms that the Twilight's Hammer did effectively unalive every single member of the Dark Trolls in northern Kalimdor, saying that she is kept around by Zandalari and Zuldazar because they like to have representation of every troll tribe and type. She's rather positive on the whole, and says that even though she's largely just a curiosity, at least she's never going to have to pay for her own drinks. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. Thanks to the in-game book we can find within Amir Jasil's base camp, we know that the first world tree on Azeroth actually was a gift from Elune that was seeping in pure Emerald Dream magic, or Nature Realm magic. If you're a D&D nerd, it's basically WoW's Feywild. The tree was so heavily steeped in this Nature Realm's magic that everywhere this tree's branches touched, new life formed. But Armenthul, the Allfather of the Titan Pantheon, ripped it out because it was too much nature, and its benefit was not worth the cost of their goals. With the Titans being essentially gods who are mostly aligned and in tune with arcane magic as a universal pillar, and their goals at the time were to make the planet's soul be more arcane in every possible way. Haranir, the titan who planted the Elunahir tree, believed its roots and magic would help combat the void from the Black Empire. Well, when Aman'Thul ripped the tree out of the earth, it formed a pretty decent-sized crater. Feeling the loss of the tree that was given to her had caused Haranir to cry, and her tears helped to keep the roots alive. But she would notice when she was looking closely that these roots still had thrived deep beneath the land and away from Aman'Thul's notice. After having seen that the roots still stayed intact, she kept it a secret from the other Titans, and instructed her personal keeper Freya to watch over the crater and nurture any life that may form there. The story ends by saying that later on in time, a group of mysterious guardians would arrive and dedicate their lives to protecting the roots. It's pretty clear from the story, and what we have seen before, getting into the War Within even, that the Haranir are intended to be the mysterious guardians of these roots. But there's even more to this. Before we step foot into Khazar, in Legion, we got the Emerald Nightmare raid, and in that raid, we see a corrupted, voidy wold tree named Il'gynoth, and what would be modern-day Un'Goro Crater. For those of you that don't know, the Emerald Dream reflects what Azeroth would be, without modification by the mortal plane or races. So in the dream, the Sundering never happened, for example. So given the fact that Il'gynoth is positioned in Un'Goro Crater, and the fact that it is, well, a giant crater full of flourishing life, it would make sense if Elunahir was planted within what would become Un'Goro Crater. Now, we know that dog trolls settled mostly in what would become modern-day Kalimdor, and they settled near places of intense nature magic, preferring walled trees, and they lived in caves, often those connected to or formed by the roots of said trees. It is highly possible and likely that a group of dog trolls had went to Un'Goro Crater and settled deep within the cave systems there, as we also know that Elunahir's roots went extremely deep. Location-wise, this all adds up, as the Isle of Dorn, which is the first zone of Khazar, is off the coast of Tanaris, which is a province on the eastern border of Un'Goro Crater, and as we go underground, the zones actually stretch out towards Kalimdor and the sea around the island, which could put Osgiliath somewhere near the old god activity of Ahn'Qiraj and Silithus, which also adds into the Elunahir story about Haranir having used it in an attempt to weed out old god corruption in the area. I'll put a timestamp on the screen if I remember while editing to let you know when the spoiler part ends, but we know that the Harronir are not from Osgiliath. In fact, they traveled from their home to follow their leader, Orwina, the Harronir from the cinematics. We also know that they do not like to be seen or noticed by anyone, which is kind of similar to the dog trolls. The party of Harronir we see are mostly all druids of some kind, with them transforming, if people are nearby, in order to stay out of sight. We also know from the beta that the map was intentionally not fully given to us in its full form, as it was hiding 1 or 2 zones, and leaked developer information from the beta's earlier stages shows that the map code has data for a place known as the Rootlands, which is likely their real home and might be directly under Un'Goro or Tanaris. Spoilers over now, but another thing to note is that the Night Elven Druids are still rather high fantasy and high society with a kind of posh elegance and structure, which are traits we see really with any kind of elf in a fantasy setting. We know that the naturey magic and ways for the Night Elves were kind of like a resurgence of the old ways that Malfurion brings back into their society after it crumbles. Having presumably lost a lot of their old rights from when they were dog trolls, as the Night Elven culture in general was such a stark shift to high society and arcane. Whereas with the Harronir, there is no illusion or indication of this high society or structure to their magic. It is just purely primal and raw kind of magic, with these intense rites and dancing, which several people have pointed out is more troll-like than elf-like, making it pretty clear from everything we've seen so far, at least to me, that the evolutionary chain goes Zandalari to Dark Troll to Night Elf, or it will go Zandalari to Dark Troll to Harronir, much like how the arcane magic from the Well of Eternity transformed the trolls into elves. I believe the intense and strong nature magic from the roots of Harronir transformed the Dark Trolls into Haranir. So instead of the Harronir being the missing link for trolls to elves, it's the fact that the Dark Trolls are really the missing link from Zandalari to Harronir, as well as from Zandalari to Night Elves. If you've stuck around this long, please consider giving me a like if you enjoyed the video, and or maybe subscribing for future content. Alright, thanks.